part of the plan is smart growth.
Right.
How does that figure? What does that really mean for Janesville?
Mm-hmm. Smart growth is it's a balancing act. Again, depending on who you ask that question to, you'll probably get a variety of answers. Recently in the newspaper there was a lot of articles about farmland preservation and growth of the city, and there's a difference of opinions. Is growth necessary for a city's long-term survival? And to do so, is it worth it at the detriment of farmland? I look at smart growth in a different way. I think smart growth could probably be better labeled as responsible growth. And although that may seem synonymous, I guess I look at it a little bit differently. And personally, is that responsible growth has to take into account other factors than just growing the city. If we're going to continue to grow the city, which is it's an important aspect of government to grow the tax base and things like that. And there's a variety of ways we can do that don't necessarily include gobbling up bits of land. But responsible growth, what I would consider, it means growing at the right pace, in the right directions, at the right time. And again, it comes down to the decisions that we make as a community, what we value. Again, the city council has final say on annexation aspects and zoning aspects and things like that. So it's really the community's task to kind of make sure that we do stick to that idea of smart growth, or what I would call as responsible growth. But it is a balancing act that's difficult.
Now, along those lines, when usually land gets developed, it's because a landowner approached the developer or approached the city about annexation. Within the point of view of the smart growth or responsible growth, how proactive do you think the city should be in accepting those and looking for those opportunities?
Well, it's a good question. As you pointed out, typically those situations where annexation or development come in, it's the landowner that approaches the city.
Right.
The city doesn't actively, typically, I mean, there's always exceptions to every rule, but the city doesn't actively seek out new lands to annex. It's really up to that property owner's discretion, who owns that land, how they choose to utilize that land and that asset to themselves and their family in the future. There's a lot of different approaches that they could take. The advent of the PACE program and things like that. Where they can sell their rights to keep that land in that land in farming, agricultural use in perpetuity, and that's an option that's growing in popularity and hopefully growing in funding and critical mass in the state.
So almost using regulation to lock up that land and prevent it from being developed?
To a certain extent, yeah. But it would, again, it's at the landowner's discretion in those cases typically. The city doesn't necessarily go out and seek lands to be developed, but there's a market out there, and in a capitalistic market, supply and demand driven society, that's one of the aspects that we have to grapple with as a community is what do we value versus what do we need versus what do we want, and it becomes a balancing act, and opinions and perceptions change over time, and that's also what makes it difficult. I mean, the city has grown quite extensively as far as land mass in the last 10 years. I don't have the exact figures, but it's slowed almost to a standstill in the last 2 to 3. And that's a product of the market that is outside of any of our control for the most part. Economy, national politics, things like that. They have a great effect on that. But we can still, in a lot of ways, have that same effect here at home too, based on the decisions that we make and the policies that we adhere to.
Now, going back to the comprehensive plan. It's a different way of looking at how a community should be developed, because in the past we were looking at a situation where you have residential areas, then we get in the car, we drive someplace else where we do our shopping, restaurants, movies, everything, and then we drive back to our home. Yeah. And now we're looking at it differently, where we have more neighborhood stores and more neighborhood, mixed commercial, those kinds of opportunities.
Right. It's definitely a movement that the entire nation is kind of moving towards, and it's a good way to move. I mean, you described it really well. The old style of the Euclidean zoning of all residential is here, all commercial is on this corridor, industries kind of segmented off. That way of growing and developing is changing, and in a lot of ways it's changing for the better. This idea that you mentioned about neighborhood stores and making communities more walkable, making them more pedestrian friendly, having interconnectivity between neighborhoods via bike trails and sidewalks and things like that. It's all part of that, and this comprehensive plan again has taken that even further, and again through the document has kind of codified that as part of our planning for the future, and it's again it's up to us to execute that. But that's what this plan has heavily developed along that concept, which is quite a shift from the past of the way most communities, but especially Janesville in a lot of ways has grown, and that's a good thing, and it's going to take some time for people to get used to, and it's going to take time for the development community to get used to, but it's definitely there.
Well, what I'm hearing is that this is all about a matter of priorities.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
What is our priority number one? And as you mentioned, it's a balancing act between growing economically, but at the same time preserving our natural assets.
Yeah.
How can we effectively find a way to strike that? Is it taking it in a situation by situation?
Yeah, well, I think that's probably the $1 million question, and I think it. I don't know.
You're the management analyst.
I don't know if there's just that golden ticket to answer that question.
Is there a certain way of looking at it that would help you decide which area is more suitable for something, or what's the process that you would look through?
The short answer would be on a case-by-case basis. There's a lot of incredibly valuable, priceless farmland in La Prairie Township and east of the city.
I'm sure that the landowners love hearing that.
Right. Yeah. Well, maybe they do, and maybe they don't. That's part of the problem. And that is some of the most valuable farmland in the world, if not in the nation. Now that being said, the question is should we be looking to put homes and roads and small box, mid box stores on there, or should we be looking towards the land that's not as agriculturally valuable? Say to the northwest, the west and south.